I couldn't believe this was actually happening. An evening that began as a typical family night had quickly morphed into something sinister and strange. We were sitting on the couch watching a series, just as we had done many times before. But this time, something was different. When Mark started the conversation, I thought he was just joking or trying to tease me. But the more beer he drank, the more serious his tone became. And his words increasingly disturbing. "Claire, have you ever thought about trying that with other men?" he suddenly asked. His voice sounded so calm, as if he were suggesting we watch a different show. I laughed to diffuse the tension, but quickly realized he wasn't joking at all. His face remained serious. His eyes looked directly at me, waiting for an answer. I froze. Thoughts raced through my mind, but I tried to pull myself together and replied coldly and calmly. "What are you talking about, Mark?" But he persisted, trying to convince me that it was just a harmless fantasy worth trying as an experiment to spice up our relationship. He talked about new emotions we could experience together, about how it could add variety to our lives. His words sounded almost logical, but I felt a coldness inside that repelled me from the idea. At first, I just ignored his hints, changed the subject, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. But Mark wouldn't give up, returning to the topic again and again. He even started mentioning specific people, his friends, with whom, he said, nothing would happen unless I wanted it to. He seemed to be trying to make the proposition as appealing and safe as possible. But what repelled me wasn't the friendship itself, but the very thought of my husband picturing me in bed with someone else one evening, while we were getting ready for dinner. Mark went even further, suggesting we meet up with his friends, framing it as a casual get-together. A party at a local bar. I didn't know what to say. Something inside told me there was more to his suggestion, but I didn't want to start a fight, afraid it would lead to a breakup. Our marriage, despite all its difficulties, was important to me. I agreed, but with a heavy heart. When we entered the bar, the atmosphere felt tense. Mark's friends were nice and friendly, maybe even too friendly. But I noticed something in their glances, as if they already know about our conversation. There was an unspoken understanding between them and my husband that made me feel trapped. I tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Mark put his arm around my waist, occasionally whispering in my ear, "You look so beautiful." But his words sounded unnatural, as if he were playing a role. One of his friends, David, came closer to me than necessary and jokingly asked me to dance. I refused, pleading tiredness, but I noticed Mark giving us a strange look. There was something in his eyes I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't jealousy, but rather approval. Feeling growing unease, I stepped outside for some fresh air. All the while, a question echoed in my mind. What if Mark really wants this? What if he sees something more in it than I'm capable of understanding? My heart was pounding. A lump formed in my throat, and I could no longer ignore the alarming thoughts. When I went back inside, Mark was waiting for me at the bar. He came over and said quietly, "Claire, you have no idea how much we could experience if you were open to something new. I love you, but we both need something more." His words were like a punch to the chest. They hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I felt the ground give way beneath my feet. I realized this wasn't just a fantasy, not just a whim. Mark genuinely wanted me to say yes and was ready to push me towards it, disregarding my feelings. I tried to laugh, but deep confusion was tearing me apart inside, like ice water suddenly flooding my soul. One of the men, tall with a smug smile, kept casting long looks my way that made everything inside me clench into a tight knot. Every time I caught his gaze, it felt brazen, like he was studying me, interested in my reaction to every word. While I tried to maintain some semblance of calm, my husband, on the contrary, looked relaxed and pleased. His eyes sparkled with playfulness, as if he was genuinely enjoying the situation. I felt on the verge of panic, but it seemed he enjoyed his friend's attention focused on me, as if it were all part of something bigger. They kept drinking more, and the conversations became frank and unpleasant. One of his friends, Tom, started talking about infidelity, discussing it as something ordinary, even necessary to keep interest in a relationship. He spoke with such ease and nonchalance that it took my breath away. His words sounded like some kind of philosophy, according to which cheating is not only acceptable but also beneficial for both partners. He mentioned that his wife, Sarah, also participated in these adventures and even enjoyed their variety. That statement lodged itself deep in my mind, leaving only a feeling of deep disgust and confusion. I realized I was among people for whom moral boundaries had long since blurred. When we finally got home, I felt that something had irreversibly changed. The evening, which was supposed to be just a fun dinner, had turned into something completely different. My husband didn't even ask how I felt about inviting his friends over to continue the evening at our place. He smugly decided it was a great idea, as if my opinion didn't matter at all. From the moment we crossed the threshold, the atmosphere changed beyond recognition. The cheerful conversations and laughter on the couch in the living room no longer seemed carefree. Tension hung in the air, electrified by something ominous and unspoken. I retreated to the kitchen, seeking a moment away from that awkward company. Preparing snacks, I felt my mind frantically trying to find a way to cope with the growing sense of dread. But just as I was about to relax a little, one of my husband's friends, Steve, came into the kitchen. He offered to help, but stood too close, and I immediately felt his breath on my skin. The gesture felt too insistent, and goosebumps ran down my spine. He stood so close that I could hear his calm, quiet breathing, almost touching me. When he leaned towards the sink for a glass of water, I was suddenly overcome with an irresistible urge to step back. But as soon as I did, he leaned towards me and whispered that I looked delightful tonight. In that moment, I knew he wasn't just being friendly. There was an unmistakable insistence in his words. Fear and anxiety simultaneously gripped my throat. The situation seemed increasingly strange and dangerous. The kitchen had become a confined space I couldn't escape. My internal conflict was tearing me apart. On one hand, I wanted to call my husband and put an end to this, but on the other, I felt I'd be fooling myself if I admitted the situation was out of control. I wanted to believe it was just a friendly joke, but something in his voice and movements said otherwise. Steve kept moving closer. His movements were light but deliberate. His hand slid onto my shoulder, and that touch felt almost like a challenge. I tried to figure out how to pull away without causing a scene, but fear was already starting to paralyze my movements. It was like a prolonged dream where you want to run, but your body refuses to obey. I looked at the door, hoping my husband would appear, but he wasn't there. A feeling of hopelessness flared inside me. Should I scream or just leave the house and try to run? But at that moment, when I was about to step back to increase the distance between us, he suddenly leaned in even closer, and his lips barely brushed my ear. He whispered, "Seems like you want to flirt, don't you?" Those words hit me like an electric shock. I recoiled sharply, pressing back against the kitchen counter, trying to create at least an illusion of safe distance. My face burned, and my heart pounded as if it would burst from my chest. Overwhelmed by shame and anger, I knew I had to do something immediately, or the situation would spiral out of control. I looked at the door again, praying my husband would finally realize how far this had gone. But no one came. In that moment, I realized the only one who could put an end to this was me. While the men laughed, exchanging crude jokes and stories, I stood in the kitchen, feeling waves of fear and anger wash over me. My husband sat there, absorbed in his friend's company, paying me no attention whatsoever. His loud laughter echoed through the room, drowning out all other sounds. Everything seemed endless, as if time had slowed down, and I was trapped among strangers and alien feelings. I didn't understand how he could forget about me, as if I were just part of his inner world or, worse, an insignificant detail of his evening entertainment. When the tension became unbearable, I rushed out of the kitchen, hoping he would notice my frightened look and understand how much I needed his protection. But instead, he turned to me, grinned, and patted the couch, inviting me to sit next to him as if nothing unusual had happened. I was afraid not only for myself, but for us. Our relationship, which seemed to have long lost all warmth and support. I sat down. I sat on the edge of the couch, nervously squeezing a pillow, trying not to look at my husband, holding onto it tightly. I felt my fingers clench in fear, and huge tears streamed down my face. Inside, the fear from what had happened in the kitchen still raged, along with the realization of how close I had come to a line I never dared cross. But I couldn't find the right words to express my pain, disappointment, and helplessness. The lump in my throat seemed to prevent me from uttering a single word, as if my voice had been treacherously stolen. The men continued drinking and discussing topics, each becoming more explicit and unpleasant. My husband enthusiastically joined the conversation, as if nothing terrible had happened. As if he didn't understand or didn't want to understand what I was going through. Time passed, the evening dragged on endlessly. With each passing minute, it became harder for me to stay in the room. It was hard to breathe, as if the air was filled with something suffocating. Finally, when the men started getting up to leave, I felt a wave of relief, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from my chest. But even after they left the house, the tension didn't disappear. It remained deep inside, like a bitter residue on my soul. My husband came over to me. His face still wore a carefree smile, as if he had just hosted the perfect evening. It seemed so absurd and wrong that I couldn't stay silent any longer. What was that? I asked in a trembling voice, trying to stay calm, but feeling my voice shake with emotion. What are you talking about? He looked genuinely confused, as if he had no idea what was happening to me. His look showed surprise, and his voice had a slight tremor that angered me even more. You're imagining things? My voice trembled, and I couldn't control it. Did you let this happen on purpose? Or did you really think I was happy being in the kitchen with your friend who went too far? My husband just shrugged, maintaining a calm, even indifferent expression, as if screaming that my feelings didn't matter to him. You didn't do anything to leave, he finally said, looking at me seriously. You seemed fine with it. You even stood there and didn't try to leave right away. I thought you might be able to relax a little. I told you before, we need to add some variety to our relationship. I really want this. His words were like an icy rain. I couldn't believe my ears. Did he really think my inaction meant consent? I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, unable to stop the flow. You're my husband, I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. You were supposed to protect me, not put me in such a situation. I felt humiliated and helpless, and you just sat there laughing. How could you do this to me? We've been together for so many years, and you talk about it so easily. Lately, I don't recognize you. You've changed, become some kind of inadequate man who just abandoned his wife. I'm incredibly disappointed in you and regret so many things. We kept arguing. Each time he insisted on his point of view, and I, as if he couldn't hear me at all, was just dismissed, as if my words meant nothing to him. He insisted it was just fun, but there was something in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. I realized he had truly put me in danger. This terrible pain inside me gripped my entire body. It was the worst thing he had ever done. And I had thought I chose the right man for my life. I stood in the bedroom doorway, as if before an abyss. The thought of divorce squeezed my heart with fear and pain. After so many years together, he had managed to spit on me in a completely different way, as if my feelings meant nothing. There wasn't a drop of regret or care for me in his eyes, only cold calm. Despair overwhelmed me, and I began to doubt whether I had chosen the right man. The one who now lay on our bed as if nothing had happened. Silence reigned outside the house, but inside there was neither peace nor warmth. It seemed the walls were saturated with cold, seeping into my very soul. I knew I couldn't just leave things as they were. Something had changed between us, something had broken, and it couldn't just disappear. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Gathering my courage, I took a deep breath and walked towards the bed. My husband lay there in a relaxed pose, one hand behind his head, watching TV. As if the previous evening was just an annoying misunderstanding. He didn't even bother to look up when I entered, and that made me freeze for a moment. I looked at him, amazed at how he could be so blind to the pain and turmoil he himself had caused. I couldn't hold back anymore. We need to talk, I said in a quiet but firm voice. He looked away from the screen, reluctantly glanced at me, and raised an eyebrow. What? He asked, looking as if he truly didn't understand what I was talking about. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling my thoughts contract with pain from what had happened today. I'm trying to hold on to us, he replied with a heavy sigh, sharply putting down the remote. I already told you what it was. I don't want to talk about it anymore. You can't even relax properly. Come here. Why discuss all this? He was supposed to protect and love me, but instead left me alone to face my own fears and humiliation. I stood up and walked to the window, not looking at him. I stared at the black sky, as if trying to find answers in it. How did we end up here? When did things go so wrong in our marriage? There were times when I could call him my best friend, when we shared dreams and supported each other. Now there was a wall of icy indifference between us that I couldn't break through. I don't know if I can let this go, I finally said, looking at my reflection in the dark glass. What you did today wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal. My husband scoffed. His reaction was like a sharp blow to the heart. You're always dramatizing everything. It was just fun. You're taking it too seriously. I felt anger boiling inside me. I couldn't take it anymore. How could he so easily dismiss my feelings, my fear? How could he look at me and not see my tears? It wasn't fun, I said, turning to him. It was my pain. And if you can understand that, then maybe we have nothing more to talk about. His face froze in shock, but he didn't utter a word in response. That silence became the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't continue living as if everything was okay. I couldn't keep lying to myself.